Working harder doesn't mean that you should be paid more, and in this video, I'm going to explain why. This is a super common misconception that I see a lot of people, even adults, still make. Not only do a lot of people think that the difficulty of work should impact how much they're paid, I've seen a lot of people think that this should be the only factor that matters. That's definitely not the case. So today, we're debunking this myth of effort versus reward. If you don't know me, I'm the fireman, and I'm trying to reach financial freedom before I turn 30 years old. And barring winning the lottery or other strokes of incredible luck, reaching that milestone requires having a high paying job. And while I wish I could say that I earn six figures every year because of how hard I work, that really isn't the case. So, why do I really earn twice the salary of an American teacher starting their career? Well, there are a ton of factors that influence income. Maybe the simplest is just cost of living. Pay is relative. If I moved to Portugal, I probably couldn't count on the same income that I get right now. Things cost so much less that salaries are also probably much less. On the other hand, I wouldn't move to San Francisco without a pay increase. There's just no way I'm paying $3,000 a month for an apartment if I'm not getting rewarded for it. So, obviously, there are some things that influence how much you're paid that aren't related to how hard you work. I'd be working just as hard in Portugal or San Francisco, but the pay would be radically different. But it's not just that there are other factors that influence how much you're paid. In fact, how hard you work is almost irrelevant, or at least it might be. There are just two things that influence how much you're paid for your labor, and those things are one, demand, and two, supply. If you've ever taken an introductory economics course, you've probably seen this concept before. But a lot of people don't internalize what it really means. Let's go over the basics and then talk about how it determines how much you are paid. And at the end, I'll get back to my example of why I earn twice as much as a teacher. I'll start by talking about demand. Demand is a measure of how much an economy wants of something at a given price. If something is free, demand might be infinite. But of course, nothing is totally free. Consumers have limited dollars, so as something goes up in price, they typically buy less of it. Whoa, actually, there are a few things that are completely free, like smashing the like button. So maybe you should do that. Anyway, what people don't realize is that the law of demand applies to labor as well. Labor adds value to companies, so if labor were free, companies would have an army of employees. In reality, payroll is one of the largest expenses that companies have to pay. Employees cost a lot. Some number of highly trained employees is required for companies to create products or services of any value. But as we saw in late 2022 and early 2023, even the big super profitable tech companies engaged in big layoffs. That happened because as interest rates grew and other factors influenced their operating environment, their demand for labor decreased. While the demand curve will tell you how much consumers will buy at a given price, it doesn't actually tell you what will be bought in practice. To determine how much will actually be bought and at what price, we have to factor in supply. If consumers will always buy as much as possible and at a super high price, suppliers will try to provide as much as physically possible. But as consumers are willing to pay less and less, suppliers will provide less and less of that good or service. This same supply curve applies to labor. Again, companies would hire as many employees as they could if labor was cheap. But people don't work for free, and in a competitive market, people can always get a job that pays more. So, when salaries are great, there's a large workforce. That's why unemployment was at historic lows right before the pandemic. Then, after the pandemic, the supply of labor suddenly changed. Workers were more hesitant to work, and it didn't help that salaries were also decreasing. This caused a sharp reduction in the amount of labor that was available. It's where the demand curve and the supply curve meet that determines market rates, often referred to as the equilibrium price. If the price for a good or service was less than this equilibrium price, then there would be super high demand. Suppliers wouldn't be willing to fulfill all of this demand at this price, so supply would drop until the equilibrium price was reached. On the other hand, if prices were higher than this equilibrium price, suppliers might be creating a lot of that good or service, but consumers would be hesitant to buy that much of it. Once again, these forces would result in the market returning to equilibrium. It is these two forces, supply and demand, that determine how much labor is worth. Notice that how hard you work hasn't come up once. Now, it's not that this factor is totally irrelevant. If work is particularly unpleasant, there might be a low supply of workers willing to do that work, so that could increase the equilibrium price. But the point I wanted to make is that this is far from the only factor. So let's revisit why I make twice as much as a teacher. Teachers often work extremely hard, but according to the internet, their starting salaries are only around $40,000 per year. Compare that to my job as a data analyst. I don't feel like I have to work that hard, but my salary is closer to $100,000 a year. So let's compare supply and demand. For teachers, there is tremendous demand. Every community needs teachers, and often a lot of them. So just looking at the demand side of things, you would think teachers get paid a lot. However, there are also a ton of people that are willing to become teachers. The education department at my college was one of the largest we had. And since I've been a kid, I've known tons of people that want to become teachers when they grow up. From the demand side of things, data analysts and teachers actually have a lot in common. There's been a huge demand in data analysts as their skill set is so valuable to so many different companies. Things differ on the supply side. While it's surely a growing field, there still aren't many people that succeed in becoming a highly trained data analyst. With a smaller supply but a very in demand skill set, the equilibrium price for data analysts has become super high. So, while it's easy to think that construction workers and lawyers might work just as hard and should be paid the same, the truth is, how hard you work doesn't matter at all. The only thing that determines how much you're paid is supply and demand. Luckily, you don't have to work at all to make money, and that's because you can invest. Investing is a super important part of reaching financial freedom, and I actually just finished up a 4-part series related to the efficient market hypothesis, which you can find right here. In this short playlist, I explain what the efficient market hypothesis is, common misconceptions about it, how it might influence how you can invest, and 5 ways that you can use to beat the market. Check it out next. I'll see you next time.